This is a Lamborghini Gallardo, and let's face it, you've wanted one since you looked like this. But now, you've got mortgages to pay, you've got commitments. It's a daunting idea taking on an aging Italian, believe me. However, I'm here today to show you, number one, you don't need to worry, and number two, all the common problems, everything that tends to go wrong, so you can go out there and buy the best example possible. Let's go. So the first thing we need to have a little chat about is the distinction between Gallardos built between 2003 and 2008. We refer to these as pre-LP Gallardos. Now from 2008 onwards, those were the LP Gallardos. Right, got that? Good. So specifically in this video, we're going to be discussing the pre-LP Gallardo. Now, why not cover them all, I hear you ask? Well, the post-LP Gallardos are such different cars that honestly, that deserves its own video, and we're going to do that soon. So if you're watching this video a couple months on from when we release it, chances are we've already covered the LP Gallardo as well. This is a real Lamborghini, that one is an R8 and drag. Just kidding, just kidding. Engine then, the OG V10, what do we say about it? 5 litre, started life at 500 brake horsepower, which then moved on to 520 brake horsepower, 2006 onwards for the coupes and also for the Spiders as well. These got a little bit more power. Now, to my mind, absolute dream engine. I think these even firing V10s sound so much better than the 5.2s that they put in the later LP cars. But that's just me. So what tends to go wrong with them then? So first up, the Cats. So this was probably, in fact I'm going to say it was definitely the biggest problem that these cars faced. Now let me spell it out for you. What would happen is, well, this 5 litre engine is a complete savage. It generates colossal amounts of heat, it fires flames out, it pops, it bangs. None of that bodes well for Cats, by the way. And the Cats that were fitted to the early Gallardos, well, they were, by today's standards, a little bit old tech. Horrible combination to have old tech Cats and a bit of a savage engine. You can see where this is going. So those Cats over time would start to break up, and when they would break up, they would go into almost like a sandy-like texture. You're driving along, you close the throttle, and it sucks that back into the engine. Now obviously that causes massive amounts of damage because it's just getting absolutely pounded into the cylinder wall bores. It's essentially the same as taking a handful of gravel and chucking it into your intake. So a big question you're likely going to have or should have is, how do you identify it on a car that you're looking to buy? Well, here's something you can do, but it's not foolproof. Start the car from cold, have a look for it blowing tons of smoke, because those scratches on the cylinder wall allow oil through, and that's what you're going to see burning. And honestly, it'll use oil at a comical level as well. Now the thing I say here is, it's not foolproof. The only foolproof way of determining what damage has been done to an engine is to bore scope it. So essentially, put a little camera down into each of the spark plug holes and have a look at the damage for yourself. Oh, and if you're watching this and you already own a Gallardo and it's still got its stock Cats in, throw them in the bin. Let's go on to the next problem, but before we do, I feel it's not even right to continue on without acknowledging the greatness that lies behind us as we make this video on our little Gallardo, which quite honestly is chump change in the grand scheme, but it's a big deal to us, isn't it? So let's go on to the next problem here. Throttle bodies. Now these early Gallardos had these big old blocky throttle bodies on them. They weren't great, to be honest. Definitely had a bit of Italian charm to them. They're the reason that when you start a Gallardo, you hear the idle control kind of go up and down. Now, that's not really the problem. I quite like that. That's the character of the car. The problem is they're known to fail, and when they do, these throttle bodies are getting on for almost £2,000 each. And obviously, you've got one per bank, so you've got 2 of them on there. Now, unfortunately, there's not an awful lot we can do about it. There's no real way of protecting them. There's no real way of knowing if they're about to fail. You could buy a car and 2 weeks down the line, they fail and you end up out of pocket. Unfortunately, it's just one of those things. So now we're going to go on and talk about a problem that is so common yet so easy to miss on these cars, so it'd be a real shame if you didn't check it. However, before we get to it, quick favour to ask you guys, and that is, if you're getting value from this, please do hit the like button so other prospective Gallardo buyers can find it and get the same value from it as well. And also, we create these buyer's guides for literally every type of car. We do it for free, so if you tend to buy second hand, please do hit that subscribe button as well. It's going to be worthwhile, I promise. Anyway, that problem that I'm referring to here is to do with refueling, something you're going to be doing fairly often, you and your 10 cylinders. Now, let me set the scene for you. You pull up to the garage, looking very cool in your Gallardo, I may add. You put the pump in, and it'll only pump for 3 or 4 seconds before shutting off. Rinse and repeat. You do it again, and believe me, 3 or 4 seconds of refueling, you're going to be there a while. So what goes wrong here is it's actually the fuel breather, more often than not, on the fuel canister that sits under that left side haunch there. It tends to go bad, and that's why we get this symptom of not being able to put fuel in. Now, here's another thing to think about, and that is, last time I checked, these fuel canisters were on back order at the factory, so you could be waiting a little longer for parts than you would on your average car. Again, it's just something else to think about when you're buying one of these cars, slightly older and exotic. Now, that theme of getting your hands on parts and having a bit of difficulty in doing so, unfortunately, leads us on to some of the suspension components. Specifically, the lower arms. This is something that we're seeing wear out more and more on these cars, and it's no fault of the car. They're just getting to that age, they're getting to that mileage where parts are wearing. You know, if we look at R8s, for instance, if you buy a V8 R8, then you can't get lower arms and stuff for it. They changed everything to the V10 configuration, so you struggle to get parts on them as well. So the Gallardo is not alone in this. So if you can get parts, such as lower arms and whatnot, they can be very expensive. And that being said, there are companies out there that will refurbish these items for you, but again, it's not cheap, and you also want to be careful about what bushes and ball joints and such they're using, because some of these third-party companies can put parts in and make the cars unbearably stiff on anything other than a completely smooth road. Again, just something to think about when you go into your Gallardo purchase. So bodywork wise on your Gallardo, a couple of things to check. Now, if we look at this rear, particularly on the Spider, it's no surprise that the newer Hurricanes and Aventadors and stuff got a lot more openings to try and dissipate some of the colossal heat coming off of this engine. The little Gallardo here, it really didn't get much. It had these slats and then these openings at the back. Now, as a result, these take an absolute beating and the plastic ends up going brittle and they can break. So quite often you'll find these rear grills are kind of loose. Again, bring that up with the seller, either get them to put it right or get a bit of money off so you can put it right. Also, the rear lights are right in the firing line as well. So these tend to get little hairline cracks that'll dissipate and get worse over time. So check them carefully, because I don't even want to tell you how much one of these rear light units costs. So corrosion is unfortunately something that these older Gallardos are dealing with, but I mean, listen, these cars come from a time when PPF wasn't really a thing, that paint protection film, and quite a lot of them will still have original paint, so they get a little stone chip, they're gonna corrode, aren't they? So check round about these mirrors here and also the front wings. Obviously check the whole car, but these are the most common areas to double check. Now, there's an expression that I really hate when it comes to buying cars, and it's just buy the newest car that you can afford. Well, obviously you're going to buy the newest car you can afford, that's a given. However, that being said, there are a few changes through the years that made these Gallardos quite a bit more desirable. So let's cover them. So the earliest cars, 2003, 2004, they were the base Gallardos, dare I say, the least desirable. Now 2005, that's when the nose lift got added. Now the nose lift on a Gallardo is a really good addition, because although it's not super low here, it is lower than a Ferrari 360, a 430, an R8. We've tested it, believe me. You're going to catch on speed bumps in a Gallardo without nose lift before those cars do. Now moving on from that, 2006 onwards was when the Gallardo changed its gearing. Now that doesn't sound like that big a deal, but those early Gallardos, 2003 till 2005, the gearing was silly. You could hit almost 70 mile an hour in first gear. Now that was hugely detrimental to the clutch life, and that's quite often why you'll see a lot of horror stories relating to clutches on early cars, because it's like taking off in third gear in your normal car. So bear those things in mind and try and determine what year would be right for you. So talking about clutches, if I had £1 for every person that asked me, how long do the clutches last, Grant? I'd be able to buy that. I'm not even kidding. The answer for you is it varies so massively depending on how the car is driven. So if you get a well-driven manual car, see them last 40,000 miles if it's that later gearing. If you get an E-gear car and it's driven badly, could cook the clutch in 3,000 or 4,000 miles. So honestly, it's just down to how the car's been treated. If it is an E-gear car that you're looking at, however, remember you can get a clutch snap report done with a Lara diagnostic computer, and it'll give you an idea of how much wear is on that clutch already. Now in terms of should you go for an E-gear or a manual, I can't really answer that for you. That's going to be down to what you want from the car. From a reliability standpoint, I will say this, the manuals obviously have a lot less to go wrong than the E-gear systems, and they tend to be easier on the clutch. If you're asking my opinion, I think the manual's a little bit more involving as well, but as I say, it's going to be down to what you want from the car. So interior wise, these cars are holding up really well. Well, yeah, I mean, you're going to get a bit of wear on the leather and it can go a bit funky on the doors, but again, it's an older car, what do you expect? In terms of specifics to look at in this interior, these mirrors can be really bad on the early cars. You'll notice on this one, it's just a manual flip to change it to night mode. The earlier cars had the fancy monochromatic, I think that's what you call it, where it auto dims when a light hits it. They could fail, and the problem was they were filled with a corrosive acid that when they failed would start to leak out onto the dashboard. So it just goes from bad to worse. Not only is your mirror broke and all dark, but it can also damage what's underneath it. So check that's not happened, and check the mirror isn't completely dark. If it is and you're looking for a replacement, most owners have just replaced it with a standard one like this. Now the other point to check, this sounds a bit generic, you'd probably be checking it on any car you're buying, but specifically the Gallardo and R8s, funnily enough, they have the same issue. It's the AC compressor can tend to seize up or start to leak, so double check that the AC is working correctly in the car that you're looking at, even if it is a cold, rainy day. That would be easily overlooked, so double check it's not the case. The compressor is buried quite deep in that engine bay, so although it's an Audi part with generic copies and we can get them for £300–400, there's still a bit of labour involved in getting to them. And there you have it, you now have all the tips you need to go off and find yourself a brilliant Lamborghini Gallardo. Pre-LP, if it's the LP, you'll need to wait on the next video coming along. So how do we score it on a reliability leaderboard? Well, let's face facts here. If you're looking to buy one of these earlier pre-LP Gallardos, chances are you're considering maybe a Ferrari 360. The 430 may be a little bit out of your price range because these are slightly lower. You may also be considering an R8. So if we start there, you can imagine this as a sliding scale. The R8 is almost certainly going to be a little bit more reliable because they're based around the LP cars. Now, your Ferrari 360 is probably going to be a little bit less reliable than what we've got here because that's an old school Ferrari, let's face it. So if you can imagine R8 to Ferrari 360, you are right here. You're right in the middle. It's a slightly older car, of course. It does have a lot of Lamborghini influence and less Audi influence than what the LP cars do have, but it's still really quite reliable. So overall, we award it a very respectable 7.5 out of 10 on a reliability leaderboard. Now, thank you so much for watching. Please do hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and we'll see you next time.